Hello, everyone, and welcome. In a world that constantly encourages people to fit in, slow down for a moment and consider a different possibility. What if some of the experiences that have always made you feel different are not weaknesses at all? What if they reveal something important about how your mind understands the world? Because what you are about to hear may be one of the most honest psychological explanations for something you have quietly wondered about for years. Why certain conversations leave you feeling drained. Why some environments make you want to withdraw. Why you often feel as if your mind operates on a different wavelength from the people around you. There is a certain type of person who does not live an ordinary life, not because they were born fortunate, not because life handed them special advantages, but because the way they think, feel, and interpret reality is fundamentally different from the norm. Psychology has been studying these individuals for decades. Today, we are going to explore what truly sets them apart. When most people hear the phrase above average, they immediately think of success. Academic results, professional achievements, financial status, or social recognition. The visible markers that society often uses to measure value. But psychology tells a different story. Being exceptional is not primarily about what you have achieved. It is about the internal qualities you have developed, qualities that many people never fully cultivate. Not because they lack the ability, but because life never required them to. Researchers in cognitive psychology, personality science, and neuroscience have spent years examining these patterns. What they discovered is fascinating. Most of these traits are invisible from the outside. They reveal themselves in private moments, in the conversations people have with themselves late at night, in the decisions they make when nobody is watching, in the choices they make when comfort would have been the easier path. Over the next few minutes, we will explore 8 powerful psychological signs that often appear in people who are far from average, not to create labels, not to build an identity around them, but to provide a clearer understanding of patterns that may already exist within you. The first sign is surprisingly simple. They think in questions rather than conclusions. One of the strongest indicators of a highly developed mind is an unusual comfort with uncertainty. Most people naturally seek conclusions. The human brain dislikes ambiguity. It wants answers, certainty, and closure. As soon as a question appears, the mind often rushes toward the nearest explanation and settles there. Psychologists refer to this tendency as the need for cognitive closure. The desire to reach a definite answer and eliminate uncertainty as quickly as possible. For many people, uncertainty feels uncomfortable. But people who are truly uncommon operate differently. Their minds do not immediately search for the exit. They are willing to remain inside the question. They examine it from multiple perspectives. They challenge their own assumptions. They resist the temptation of easy answers. Most importantly, they can quietly say, I don't know yet, and they can say it without anxiety, without embarrassment, and without feeling pressured to reach a conclusion before they are ready. Research into cognitive flexibility has repeatedly shown that people who are comfortable with uncertainty tend to demonstrate higher levels of creativity, deeper reasoning, and greater adaptability when facing complex problems. In simple terms, they are not intimidated by unanswered questions. They are fascinated by them. You may recognize this tendency in yourself. Perhaps you spend time thinking about questions that others quickly dismiss. Perhaps you feel more engaged by a meaningful challenge than by an easy solution. Maybe you have always been cautious around people who appear completely certain about everything. That is not a weakness. It is often a sign of intellectual maturity, the ability to remain curious even when certainty is unavailable. Another powerful sign is an unusual discomfort with stagnation. This trait is often misunderstood because it rarely appears dramatic from the outside. Instead, it shows up as a quiet awareness that something feels wrong when growth stops. It is the feeling of reaching the end of a week and realizing that nothing inside you has evolved, that you are thinking the same thoughts, asking the same questions, and repeating the same patterns. For some people, that feels comfortable. For others, it feels deeply unsettling. Psychology often describes this tendency as growth orientation. People who possess it interpret challenges differently from most. For the average person, discomfort is often seen as a warning sign, a signal to step back and return to what feels familiar. But people who are wired for growth tend to view discomfort as information. They see it as evidence that they are encountering something new, something valuable, something capable of changing them. Instead of avoiding the discomfort, they become curious about it. They pay attention to it. They ask what it is trying to teach them. These are the people who choose the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. The people who are willing to question their own beliefs. The people who change direction, even when life appears to be going well, simply because they sense there is another level of growth waiting for them. They are not constantly chasing change for its own sake. They are responding to an internal compass that consistently points toward development. And over time, that quiet commitment to growth creates a life that often looks very different from the lives of those who settle into comfort. Another sign is the way they protect their attention. Attention is one of the most valuable resources a human being possesses. Every moment of focus invested in something unimportant is a moment that cannot be invested elsewhere. This is not merely a motivational idea, it is a psychological reality. Studies of peak performance and meaningful engagement have consistently shown that people who experience the greatest levels of fulfillment tend to be highly intentional about where their attention goes. People who are not average understand this instinctively. They are not necessarily antisocial. They are selective. They constantly evaluate what deserves access to their mental energy. They notice which conversations leave them feeling inspired and which leave them feeling drained. They recognize when an environment is consuming their attention without providing anything valuable in return. As a result, they make deliberate choices. They leave the noise behind. They step away from distractions. They create space for reflection, not because they believe they are better than others, and not because they dislike people, but because they understand the true value of focused thought. You may have experienced this yourself, a quiet resistance to unnecessary drama. A reluctance to engage in conversations that go nowhere, a strong need to protect your mental space even when others do not understand it. That is not antisocial behavior. It is cognitive self-respect, and it often reflects a person who understands that their attention is shaping the future they are building. Another defining trait is the ability to experience pain without allowing it to become an identity. Pain is universal. Everyone experiences disappointment, loss, rejection, failure, and heartbreak. These experiences do not determine who we become. What matters is what happens afterward. Many people gradually begin to build their identity around their wounds. The pain becomes the story they tell themselves. It becomes the lens through which they interpret new experiences and future possibilities. Over time, they stop carrying the pain. The pain begins carrying them. But people who are psychologically resilient tend to respond differently. They allow themselves to feel what is real. They do not pretend to be unaffected. They do not suppress their emotions. They do not rush through grief simply to appear strong. Instead, they move through the experience honestly. And somewhere during that process, they make an important decision. They refuse to allow the pain to define who they are becoming. They understand that pain is an experience, not an identity. It is something that happened to them, not something they must remain forever attached to. From a psychological perspective, this ability is closely connected to the brain's capacity for emotional regulation, perspective-taking, and long-term thinking. In practical terms, it means they can acknowledge suffering without surrendering their future to it. The pain becomes part of their story, but it never becomes the author of it. Studies on emotional resilience suggest something fascinating. The people who emerge strongest from adversity are not necessarily the ones who suffered the least. More often, they are the ones who allowed themselves to experience the pain fully and then asked a question that changes everything. What can this experience teach me that nothing else could? Instead of carrying pain indefinitely, they process it. They extract meaning from it. They transform it from a wound into wisdom. Over time, that transformed pain becomes fuel. It sharpens their perspective, strengthens their character, and quietly contributes to everything they create afterward. Another sign is that their standards come from within rather than from the outside world. If you ask most people how they determine whether they have succeeded, their answer usually depends on external feedback, recognition, approval, praise, validation from other people. But individuals who operate differently often measure themselves using an entirely different system. Psychology refers to this as an internal locus of control, the belief that personal outcomes are influenced primarily by one's own decisions, effort, and standards, rather than by external circumstances or the opinions of others. People with this orientation do not wait for the world to tell them whether something is good enough. They already know. In many cases, the standards they set for themselves are far higher than anything others would ever expect. They revise details no one else would notice. They continue improving work that appears complete to everyone around them. They think about problems long after others have moved on. And when they fall short of their own standards, they feel it, even if nobody else sees a flaw. This is one reason they are often misunderstood. People see the finished result. They do not see the countless private decisions, corrections, and improvements that happened behind the scenes. They do not see the invisible structure being built day after day when nobody is watching. Yet it is precisely that unseen structure that eventually produces outcomes that appear effortless from the outside. Another important sign is that they feel deeply without turning their emotions into a performance. There is a common misconception that emotionally strong people somehow feel less than everyone else. That composure means distance. That calmness means emotional detachment. Psychology suggests something very different. Many emotionally mature individuals actually experience emotions with remarkable intensity. The difference is not that they feel less. The difference is that they have learned how to experience those emotions without being controlled by them. People who are not average often feel things profoundly. A difficult conversation may stay with them long after it has ended. They notice subtle emotional shifts that others overlook. They sense tension before it becomes visible. They experience sadness, gratitude, joy, and compassion in ways that run far deeper than what appears on the surface. But they have learned a distinction that many people never fully understand: the difference between feeling an emotion and displaying it for attention. They do not exaggerate their reactions to gain sympathy. They do not suppress their feelings to appear stronger than they are. Instead, they allow themselves to experience emotions honestly and privately. Because of this, there is often a quiet depth about them. People feel understood around them. They feel seen. They feel heard. And although few can explain exactly why they are drawn to these individuals, the reason is often simple. Being genuinely understood is one of the rarest experiences a person can have. And these individuals possess a remarkable ability to offer that experience to others. Another sign is that they think in years while most people think in moments. Many people make decisions based primarily on what feels rewarding right now, what produces the fastest result, what delivers immediate comfort, what creates instant gratification. But people who are not average often view life through a much longer lens. They are thinking about who they will become years from now. They are focused on the cumulative effect of small decisions repeated consistently over time. They understand that meaningful growth is rarely dramatic. It is gradual, it is often invisible, and it usually requires patience. Because of this, they frequently make choices that seem confusing to others. They pass on opportunities that appear attractive in the short term because those opportunities do not align with their larger vision. They invest time and energy into projects that may produce no visible reward for months or even years. They continue building when there is little evidence that progress is occurring, and this creates one of the most challenging aspects of living differently. At times, they appear to be falling behind. Others seem to move faster. Others appear to achieve more. Others collect visible rewards while their own efforts remain hidden, but they understand something many people forget. Not all growth is immediately visible. Some of the most important work happens beneath the surface long before anyone else can recognize it. And eventually, what appeared invisible begins to reveal itself. The final sign is that they stop apologizing for being different. Many people who think deeply or perceive the world differently spend years trying to fit into environments that were never designed for them. They often feel misunderstood. They struggle to explain the way they see things. They move through life carrying a subtle sense of separation from the people around them. For a long time, they may interpret this difference as a flaw, as evidence that something is wrong with them. And that can be one of the loneliest experiences a person can face. The loneliness of feeling out of sync with the world around you. The loneliness of thinking differently, feeling differently, and processing life differently. But over time, something changes. They begin to realize that fitting in is not always the highest goal. They understand that many of the people who create meaningful work, build extraordinary lives, and leave lasting contributions were never the people who blended perfectly into every environment. They were often the people who accepted their differences rather than hiding them. The people who stopped apologizing for the way they thought. The people who stopped shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. And the people who finally understood that being different is not a problem to solve. It is often the very thing that allows them to become who they were meant to be. The people who create the most meaningful lives are often the ones who eventually stop treating their differences as flaws. It does not happen overnight. For many, it is a slow and sometimes painful transformation, a shift from asking, "What is wrong with me?" to asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" A shift from constantly trying to fit in to finally understanding who they are. They stop reducing the depth of their thoughts simply to make others comfortable. They stop apologizing for asking bigger questions. They stop hiding the parts of themselves that do not fit neatly into expectations. And perhaps most importantly, they stop waiting for permission to become fully themselves. When that shift finally happens, something remarkable begins to change. What once felt like isolation starts to feel like direction. What once felt like confusion begins to feel like clarity. The very qualities that made them feel different become the qualities that guide them toward the right people, the right opportunities, the right conversations, and ultimately, the right life. If you listened to these signs and felt something deeper than agreement, if you felt recognition, then perhaps you already understand what this means. Not because you are better than anyone else, not because you are more important, but because your life has required you to develop ways of thinking, feeling, and growing that many people never have reason to develop. You question things others accept without thought. You protect your attention because you understand its value. You feel deeply, even when nobody sees it. You hold yourself accountable to standards that exist entirely within you. You transform setbacks into lessons. You think beyond the moment while much of the world remains focused on the immediate. And perhaps most importantly, you have spent far too much time wondering why you feel different instead of recognizing that your difference may be pointing towards something meaningful. The goal was never to become like everyone else. The goal was to understand yourself clearly enough that you could become more fully who you already are. So before you leave, take a moment to reflect. Which of these signs felt most familiar to you? Which one felt as though it was describing a part of your life that few people truly see? Sometimes a single insight can change the way you understand yourself for years to come. And if today's conversation gave you a new perspective, carry it with you. Return to it when doubt appears. Return to it when you feel out of place. Return to it whenever you forget how much growth can happen quietly, beneath the surface, long before anyone else notices. Thank you for spending these moments here. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep becoming the person you are capable of being.